Hi, everybody. I'm John Lappy, professor of political science at Plymouth State University. That is Frankie. And when I am recording this, it is October of 2022, only a few weeks before the midterm elections, with control of the U.S. Congress at stake. By the time you are watching this, you will have probably seen the results of those elections. So today, let's talk about what's at stake. Let's talk about the United States Congress. What are the key differences between the House and the Senate? The House is much larger than the Senate at 435 members. Each state gets a number of U.S. House districts roughly proportionate to their share of the national population. So California has about 12% of the U.S. population, and they have about 12% of the seats in the U.S. House. And states can actually gain or lose seats in the House if their share of the population increases or decreases. So after 2020, West Virginia's share of the U.S. population had decreased, so they actually went from having 3 seats in the U.S. House to having only 2. So each state, except for a handful only entitled to 1 member of the House, each state divides the state into a number of geographic districts of more or less equal population, and each district elects 1 member of the U.S. House. Importantly, House members only serve 2-year terms, meaning 100% of the U.S. House is up for re-election every 2 years. This is why House seats are usually considered less valuable to a politician than a seat in the Senate. In the Senate, they serve 6-year terms. And these terms are staggered, meaning only 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. So House members have to worry. Re-election is always around the corner. But in the Senate, more often than not, re-election is 4 or 6 years away. Only 1/3 are actually up for re-election anytime soon. This enables senators to take a longer-term view of things than the House. The other key difference is that in the Senate, each state gets 2 seats regardless of their share of the population. California, the largest state, something like 60 times the population of Wyoming, doesn't matter. Each state gets 2 senators. It's important to realize the House and the Senate aren't carbon copies of each other. The Senate is not the House, just with fewer members and longer terms. They actually have very different natures. For one rather obvious one, the Senate tends to be more deliberative or take a longer-term view than the House. Well, that's because the House has 2-year terms, the Senate has 6-year terms. Most senators aren't up for re-election for a while, so they can afford to be deliberative. Sorry, my cat Rosie just came by, and I am morally obligated to give her some petting. The Senate and the House also differ in their rules. The Constitution is vague on the rules of the House and the Senate, implicitly leaving it up to them. The Constitution isn't trying to micromanage them. You ever heard of the filibuster? That's not in the Constitution. You will look there in vain. The filibuster is just a rule of the Senate. So let's talk about the other key difference between the House and the Senate. The House is what we call a majoritarian chamber. That means the majority will almost always win. The Senate is called minoritarian. That doesn't mean the minority party will actually win per se, but the majority won't always get what they want. So in the House, why are they a majoritarian institution? It comes down to 2 key reasons. The first is they have strict limits on debate. In the House, it depends on the bill in question, but in general, they have 5 minutes per member of the House. That's the longest they're allowed to talk, is 5 minutes per member. And not every member is guaranteed the ability to speak. What that means is that eventually debate will run out and the bill will move to a vote. The second reason is the Speaker of the House, the leader of the U.S. House. The Speaker is the leader of the majority party in the House. At the time of recording, that is Nancy Pelosi, leader of the House Democrats. The Democrats have the majority, so she gets to be Speaker of the House. The Speaker has many important powers, but the most important power the Speaker has is control over the U.S. House agenda. Basically, that means the Speaker determines what gets a vote in the U.S. House. Let's say a member of the minority party in the House proposes a bill. Well, it's going to go to the Speaker, and the Speaker will probably decide they don't like this bill, and therefore they're not going to put it on the schedule. The bill will never proceed. They will never get a vote. It will never pass. It won't become a law. So if you're in the minority party, you're out of luck. You're never going to get one of your bills to pass. That is why we call the House a majoritarian institution. The majority party is always going to win. The minority does not have any effective tool to stop the majority, nothing like the filibuster, which we'll be discussing shortly in the Senate. Okay, so how about the U.S. Senate? Leadership tends to be weaker in the Senate than the House. The leadership is also a bit more complex. The Vice President officially has the power to preside over the Senate and to break tie votes in the Senate, but they're not really the Senate's leader. The leader of the Senate is the majority leader of the Senate, who, well, the name kind of tells you exactly what they are. Senate Majority Leader does have control over the agenda of the Senate, but there is a key difference between the House and the Senate that means that the Senate, the majority, does not always win the filibuster. By default in the Senate, on most bills, and understand what I'm about to tell you is something of a simplification. It is slightly more complex than this. But on most bills in the Senate, there are no limits on debate. The Senate can debate the bill for as long as it wants. Each senator can speak for as long as they want. The debate can be ended and they can move to a vote on the bill if cloture is invoked. Cloture means end the debate and move to a vote. But to invoke cloture, you don't need 51 votes, a majority. You need 60 votes, 3/5 of the membership, currently 60 votes. What this means is if the minority party in the Senate has 41 seats, they can just vote no on cloture. And then the debate will never end. And if the debate never ends, the bill can never pass. This is the filibuster. And it is the reason that in the House, the minority party, they have the right to complain, and that's about it. Whereas in the Senate, the minority party has real power. In the Senate, the minority party actually has something they can use to stop the majority from passing bills. This can force the majority to negotiate and compromise, ideally, or you could simply lead to gridlock, just prevent the majority party from passing any bills that you don't approve of. That is why in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, the Democrats had the presidency, the House, and control of the Senate. Nonetheless, that does not mean that Biden has been able to accomplish his legislative agenda, because the Republicans still have the votes to launch a filibuster. And having a filibuster-proof majority, 60 votes, that's incredibly rare. The Democrats had it for 2 years during the start of Obama's administration. And that's it. Before then, you'd have to go back to the 1960s, 70s, excuse me. The Republicans, I can't even tell you when the last time they had 60 votes in the Senate. It'd be before the Great Depression. What this means is that in the Senate, the minority actually has some power.